In ancient times, when forests still spoke in quiet voices and people understood the signs of the wind and the earth, the story of a man named Slaven began. His name was not known only in one village or in one land, but it slowly spread like an echo through mountains, rivers, and distant continents. Slaven was a warrior from a brotherhood many called the Lion's Team, a fellowship of men who believed in courage, honor, and the strength of the spirit. This brotherhood was not formed by chance, nor was it an ordinary group of companions, but a bond which, as the elders said, was born under the watch of the heavens and protected by ancient blessings. At the heart of this story stands a strange event that took place many years earlier when the white shaman of Colombia, a man believed by many to be the keeper of ancient knowledge, first spoke the name that would one day echo across the world. This shaman lived deep in the jungle between rivers and mountains, and he possessed the rare gift of seeing what others could not see. People said he spoke with the spirits of nature, understood the language of birds, and could read the fate of men within the flames of fire. Uh, One night, while sitting beside a fire that quietly crackled in the darkness of the jungle, the shaman received a vision. Within the flames, he saw a man with strong hands and a calm gaze, a man walking through the forests of Europe whose name would one day reach Africa, the Americas, and distant lands across the earth. In that vision, he saw the man ignite fire using nothing but wood and patience, saw him capture wild game with his own teeth like the hunters of ancient times, and saw him walking through life without fear. The shaman then spoke words that later became part of legend. He said that a warrior would come who carried the strength of a lion and the peace of a man who understands nature. He said that this warrior would belong to a brotherhood that people would call the Lion's Team because their courage would resemble that of the king of beasts. When the vision ended, the shaman spoke the name Slaven, and those who sat by the fire that night did not yet understand why. Years passed, but the story continued to live. Meanwhile, in Europe, people began speaking about a man who belonged to a community known as the Vedran Bajun Adventures. This community was respected among those who loved nature, challenge, and a life lived without fear. They were not ordinary travelers, but people who sought the limits of their own strength and pushed those limits further than most believed possible. Among them, Slaven became a name spoken with respect. It was said that he could ignite fire using only two pieces of wood, without matches and without a lighter, just as men had done in ancient times. While others would give up after several attempts, Slaven would calmly continue rubbing wood against wood until smoke appeared, and from the smoke a small spark of life that grew into flame. There were also stories that sounded almost unbelievable. One of them spoke of a moment deep in the forest, far from civilization, when he found himself without weapons and without tools. When a wild animal appeared before him, many would have fled, but Slaven was not such a man. It was said that in that moment he revealed a strength known only to the hunters of the oldest times, and that he captured wild game using his own teeth and the power of his body, as if the spirit of his ancestors had awakened within him. Yet perhaps the most mysterious part of his story took place far from Europe, on African soil, where the sun and the earth feel different from anywhere else in the world. There, according to those who traveled beside him, Slaven experienced a meeting that later became almost legendary among the members of the Brotherhood. As he walked across the savannah, a lion appeared in the distance, powerful and majestic, the creature many call the king of beasts. People expected the lion to show dominance and power, yet something happened that no one could easily explain. The lion stopped and looked directly into Slaven's eyes, but it showed no aggression. In that moment, as witnesses later described, it seemed as if an ancient understanding existed between the man and the beast. Some said that this lion was Simba, the spirit of the lion that in African traditions represents strength, protection, and a royal blessing. After that encounter, people began to say that Slaven had received the blessing of Simba, a blessing that is not given often and cannot be bought or learned. It is a blessing granted only to those who carry courage, patience, and true respect for nature. From that day forward, the story of Slaven traveled further than ever before. Within the community of Vedran Bajin Adventures, his name was spoken with admiration, And among the members of the Lions team, it was said that he was living proof that courage is not merely the strength of the body, but the strength of the spirit. Thus, the legend of Slaven began, a warrior who walked between the world of men and the world of nature, a man who could summon fire from wood, hunt like the ancient predators, and carry the blessing of the lion from the African savanna. And those who knew the old stories would quietly say that this was not the end of his tale, but only the beginning of a path that would lead him toward even greater trials and deeper mysteries of the world. The turning point in the legend of Slaven came quietly, without thunder or warning, as many great changes in life often do. For years, he had lived as a disciplined warrior, guided by the code of the Lions team and by the expectations placed upon him after the blessing that many believed he had received. Among the members of the Brotherhood, there existed an unspoken rule that those who carried the deeper spiritual calling would remain in celibacy, guarding their strength and clarity of spirit. Slaven had followed that path faithfully, believing that sacrifice was part of the destiny placed before him. Yet destiny rarely follows the straight road that men expect. During one of the journeys that brought together people from distant lands, Slaven encountered a young woman from America named Dahlia. She was unlike anyone he had ever met before. There was something in her voice and in the calm strength of her character that seemed to move the quiet parts of his soul that had long been sealed away by discipline and duty. Dahlia did not see him as a legend, nor as a warrior surrounded by rumors of supernatural feats. She spoke to him simply as a man. What began as conversation slowly grew into something deeper. Slaven, who had faced wild animals, storms, and hunger without fear, found himself confronting a challenge he had never prepared for. The ancient discipline of celibacy began to weaken under the presence of something far more powerful than command or tradition. He fell in love. For Slaven, it felt as if a different kind of fire had been lit within him, not the fire he once created by rubbing wood against wood in the forests, but a quieter and more dangerous flame that lives in the heart of a man. Far away, in the jungles of Colombia, the white shaman once again sat before a sacred fire. It was said that he could still see the threads of destiny moving across the world. One night, as the flames rose and twisted in the darkness, the shaman fell into a deep trance. The spirits that guided him began to show him visions again. What he saw shocked him. Within the moving flames, he saw Slaven no longer walking alone in discipline, but standing beside Dahlia. He saw the warrior who had once carried the blessing of Simba, now walking a path guided by love instead of spiritual restraint. To the shaman, this was not a small change, but a breaking of the sacred order that had been foreseen years earlier. The trance grew deeper, and those who were present said that the white shaman's voice changed as he spoke through the fire. He declared that the powers given to Slaven had been tied to his discipline and to the path chosen for him. By abandoning celibacy, the warrior had stepped away from the ancient alignment that allowed those powers to exist. The shaman then pronounced a decision that would alter Slaven's fate. Through ritual and through the authority he believed had been granted to him by the spirits of the jungle, the white shaman declared that Slaven's gifts would be taken away. The fire that once answered to his patience would no longer awaken in his hands. The instincts that allowed him to hunt like the hunters of ancient times would fade. The invisible protection that many believed he carried after meeting Simba would be withdrawn. And the punishment did not end there. The shaman proclaimed that Slaven would be driven far from the path of the Lions team. His destiny, he said, would now lead him north to the cold lands of Norway. Far from the brotherhood that once respected him, there he would live not as a warrior of legend, but as an ordinary man among ordinary people. So the exile began. In the harsh and silent landscapes of Norway, Slaven slowly began a life that felt completely different from the one he had once known. The forests were colder, the mountains sharper, and the days quieter than the wild adventures that had once defined his name. Without the recognition of the Lions team, and without the supernatural aura that once surrounded him, he became almost invisible in the eyes of the world. The years of legend seemed to dissolve into something that few people around him could even imagine. In time, Slaven turned to a new path. Instead of gathering around campfires with warriors and explorers, he began speaking into a camera. The modern world had its own strange arena where stories and voices traveled across the globe through a platform known as YouTube. There, in front of the silent lens, Slaven began sharing fragments of the life he had once lived. He spoke of the Lions team. He spoke of the blessing of Simba. He spoke of fire born from wood and of hunts in the deep forests. But the world he now faced was different from the one that had shaped his legend. People listened, but many did not believe him. To them, he seemed like just another man telling impossible stories on the internet. Few could imagine that the quiet man speaking from the north had once been the warrior whose name had echoed through forests, savannas, and distant continents. In the eyes of the world, he had become an ordinary person. And so Slaven lived between two realities. In one reality, he was the forgotten warrior of the Lions team, the man who once carried a blessing from the King of Beasts. In the other reality, he was simply a man with a camera, speaking to a world that no longer recognized the legend he had once been. The final chapter of Slavin's story does not begin with victory, nor with complete defeat, but with something far more uncertain. It begins with a quiet question that remains unanswered. In the cold northern land of Norway, where the long winters stretch across mountains and forests, Slaven continued living the life of a man who once carried a legend but now walked in obscurity. The camera in front of him had become his new campfire, and the viewers who gathered in the live chat of his YouTube broadcasts were the only witnesses to the fragments of a past that few believed had ever existed. Night after night, he spoke about the Lions team, about the journeys that once defined him, about the strange blessing that many believed he had received from Simba in the African savannah. Yet to most listeners, these stories sounded like distant myths rather than memories of a real life. Many laughed, some doubted, and only a small group of loyal voices in the chat continued encouraging him. But behind the stories and behind the stubborn determination that Slaven showed on camera, there was a deeper struggle that few could fully see. Dahlia, the woman who had once appeared in his life like a sudden flame, had not remained the figure he believed her to be. Over time, the warmth that once drew him closer began to reveal a colder truth. She no longer spoke to him with admiration or quiet respect. Instead, she began to mock the stories that once defined him. She laughed at the legends of the Lions team. She dismissed the blessing of Simba as fantasy. And sometimes, according to those who heard the conversations, she treated him as a man who had been easy to deceive. To some observers, it became clear that Dahlia had never truly understood the world Slaven came from. Some believed she had simply played with his emotions, leading him away from the path that once gave him strength. Others said she had only seen a man searching for meaning and had taken advantage of his devotion. Yet the strange thing was that Slaven himself seemed unable to see it clearly. It was as if something held his mind in a fog, as if the memory of the love he once believed in continued to pull him forward even while the reality around him grew harsher. Those watching from the outside sometimes described it as a spell, not a literal magic of ancient shamans, but the powerful illusion that can take hold of the human heart. And so, the great question began to grow. Could Slaven awaken from this illusion? The old teachings of the white shamans still echoed quietly in the background of the story. According to those teachings, the powers that once belonged to Slaven had not vanished forever. They had been withdrawn, waiting for the moment when the warrior would return to the discipline and clarity that once guided his path. If he were to reject the deception that had taken hold of his life, if he were to turn away from Dahlia and listen once again to the deeper call within his spirit, then perhaps the ancient balance could be restored. Perhaps the fire would answer his hands again. Perhaps the instincts of the old hunters would return. Perhaps the blessing of Simba would awaken once more. Those who watched him through YouTube began to sense this possibility. In the live chats, there were voices who encouraged him to remember who he once was. Some told him that the path of a warrior is never straight, and that many legends are forged only after great falls. Others reminded him that discipline and clarity can be rebuilt, even after years of confusion. They urged him to see the truth about Dahlia. They urged him to trust the inner call that once guided him. But Slaven remained stubborn. Whether it was pride, lingering love, or the deep confusion that sometimes grips a man who has lost his direction, he did not easily accept their advice. Again and again, the chat would fill with messages telling him that he was meant for more than the quiet life he now lived. Yet he often resisted those voices. And so the story does not end with a clear resolution. It ends with uncertainty. Somewhere in the cold north sits a man who may once have been a warrior of legend, a man who may once have carried a blessing that few humans ever receive. Around him are people watching through glowing screens, urging him to wake up and reclaim the path he abandoned. The only question that remains is whether Slaven will finally see the truth before it is too late. If he does, the legend of the Lions team may yet rise again. If he does not, the world may never know that a great warrior once walked among them, lost not in battle, but in the quiet confusion of the human heart.